In northern Afghanistan tonight, United Front forces are preparing for what they hope will be a decisive ground offensive against the Taliban, at least in the north. And they're counting on support from the U.S. and its allies to help get that job done. CBS's Jim Axelrod is in the United Front stronghold in the Panjshir Valley, north of Kabul. Jim?
Unlike the first two nights, tonight has been relatively quiet. 8 or 9 loud explosions early on, and then virtually nothing with the exception of a drone flying over twice hours later. This could be the sign of American success, as one high-ranking United Front official told us before tonight's bombings. Virtually every major military target in Kabul had already been destroyed.
On this third night of airstrikes, the strategy is changing, with the Taliban's air defenses now lying in the rubble of Kabul. U.S. and British warplanes can soon fly lower and slower, targeting Taliban troops.
That will change the balance in the whole war against the Taliban.
The United States and the United Front are now effectively partners in this war. These United Front troops are gearing up for a ground offensive. Dr. Abdullah says they have a promise. The U.S. and Great Britain will act as their air force. It's a partnership that was unthinkable just a few weeks ago. At this point, do you consider the United Front to be an ally of the United States and the United States to be an ally of the United Front?
I think so. In the war against terror, we are allies.
According to the United Front, the most significant development of the past several days occurred far from here and is virtually impossible to confirm. Some 40 Taliban commanders and 1,200 troops are said to have defected in key regions that would cut off supply routes. If true, that could cripple the Taliban. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, 20 miles north of Kabul.
Jim Axelrod by video phone from northern Afghanistan. There were more violent clashes between pro-Taliban protesters and police in some Pakistan cities today. Fueling the protesters' anger was a casualty report out of Afghanistan, as CBS's Alan Pizzi reports from Quetta, Pakistan, on the Afghan border.
The first confirmed civilian casualties of the air campaign died in last night's bombing raids on the Afghan capital, Kabul. 4 Afghan employees of a UN landmine clearing project were killed when their compound was hit.
They have missed their target. We don't know why they have done this, why they have dropped bomb here.
The U.S. claims its raids are aimed at purely military targets, but people here aren't buying it, and that disbelief is one of the sparks for rioting in Pakistan. Pakistani police were out in force to prevent the anger from spreading, watching over the cleanup of yesterday's protests, wondering where and when violence will break out next.
The Pakistani government thinks authority means majority, one man here said. These protests will show them it's the other way around. That's a message Washington will have to consider too as it presses ahead against the Taliban.
Afghan exiles warn that simply defeating the Taliban won't mean a stable Afghanistan or the end of terrorism supporters.
If there is a vacuum of power, there will be more disorder, more trouble than a fighting situation even.
Taliban spiritual leader Mullah Muhammad Omar's home in Kandahar was reportedly hit overnight. Afghan sources said Omar's uncle and brother-in-law were killed, but he escaped to a town 40 miles away. And in anticipation of more strikes, civilians were stocking up or packing up to get out of town. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, Quetta.
While struggling to maintain its balance on a political tightrope, the government of Pakistan has adopted a hard line against the protesting supporters of the Taliban. CBS's Richard Roth is in Islamabad.
Pro-Taliban demonstrators today were outraged at the Pakistan government's moves to crack down. In an effort to take the steam out of their protest against airstrikes in Afghanistan, 3 hardline clerics have been put under detention. But the mullahs who remain say this movement won't be stopped.
There will be millions and millions of people, and you will witness it in a few days if these attacks continue like that.
There are clear signs the government's getting ready if push comes to shove. Stepped up security is part of a sweeping campaign to make sure support for the war on terrorism doesn't destabilize Pakistan's government. And inside the sandbagged offices of the capital, Pakistan's president is taking bold moves to manage events.
I would like to remain a soldier. That's why I'm in uniform here.
A general who took power 2 years ago in a coup, President Pervez Musharraf has just reshuffled his command staff, sidelining 3 generals and the head of intelligence. All were considered sympathetic to Islamic supporters of the Taliban.
By this move, he has strengthened himself, he has consolidated his position and his power base.
He's also cemented his new role as an ally of the West. The U.S. has lifted economic sanctions and promises of aid are pouring in. An expert here says the political scene in Pakistan now boils down to 3 key elements: America, the army, and Allah. President Musharraf has finessed the first 2, he says, and unless the air war drags on, he should be able to manage the third. Richard Roth, CBS News, Islamabad.
Next on the CBS Evening News from Washington, a look at some of the new weapons and tactics the U.S. are using to own the skies over Afghanistan.